Hey, welcome to Wonderful Works Talks, where we talk all about the disability ministry mission of helping churches become accessible for all. I'm your host, Barb Stanley, and today we have a special treat. We will be sharing part 2 of our conversation with Chaplain Brad Lee. Last month, we learned all about the world of disability parenting in the military, and today we're going to get really personal and learn why Brad is so passionate about helping other parents of children with disabilities, especially when it comes to protecting their marriage. Trust me when I say this is a deep conversation that you will be personally enriched from, so you don't want to miss it. But before we get to that, I want to stop and ask a question. Why is it important that in the midst of struggle, we look for the hope? Well, today we're going to talk about that and so much more. Find out why being special needs parents can actually add to your marriage, what questions pastors should be asking families, and what being an image bearer can really look like. So without further ado, please join me as we welcome our guest, retired military chaplain and executive director of the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute, Brad Lee. All right, so we are excited to have part 2 of our discussion with Chaplain Brad Lee. And today he's going to tell us about another project that he's working on that he's very passionate about. Brad is the executive director of the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute. So Brad, we're so excited to have you talk to us today.
Thank you, Barb. It's such a joy to be back. I appreciate the opportunity.
So Brad, can you tell us a little bit about your own family and why supporting special needs families with marriage is so important to you?
Absolutely. I'll go back, and this is kind of my elevator pitch as to why I do what I do. Our son Kaydan, who was our 5th child at the time, was born in January 27th, 2013. We did not know that he had Down syndrome and would also be later diagnosed with autism. But at about month 3 or 4 into his life, we had an occupational therapist who used to come to the house and work with him. And she did exercises and different things. And she was also the president of the Alaska Down Syndrome Congress, and just had great rapport with her and enjoyed talking to her. And I was a newly licensed therapist at that point, marriage and family therapist. And we're talking one day, and I thought I'd sound real smart and ask her questions, And I said, "So Donna," I said, "tell me what your observations are about families who have children with Down syndrome and the impacts on the family system of the marriage," or however I worded it. And I'll never forget, she just very matter-of-factly stopped in the middle of her work and turned at me, and she said, "Oh, most of them don't make it." And that was the moment that I realized that my wife and I were at risk. And we didn't even realize it. We didn't know how. And so over time, that conversation really set something in my heart, a seed that ultimately became writing that I did, that ultimately came an interest in advocating for special needs families, for children with disabilities, and then ultimately to begin my doctorate in working on what I call the special needs marriage. And I define that as a marriage in which one or more children are either born with, diagnosed, or even adopted, that have a behavioral, mental health, or physical disability that impacts what I call the normal flow of marital and family life.
Right.
And that's kind of my working definition as to what I call the special needs marriage, and has thus become kind of the bedrock of how I understand and the framework that I operate from when I engage with families who have special needs children or children with disabilities, whatever the term is, and wherever that applies.
Yeah, so I know we talk a lot about if you have a child with a disability, it is harder on the marriage. And so if you're someone listening to this who does not have a child with a disability, I think sometimes you may think you know why it is harder. But as someone who's living it, can you tell us a little bit what it really looks like? In particular, Brad, if you remember, so Brad and I were just at a conference together on a panel about disability ministry, and he shared an example of what this can really look like in a day-to-day basis in a marriage. Do you remember that? Could you share that with our audience?
Absolutely. That's kind of my go-to example that I've shared with the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, having presented on this very topic and have written about in their Family and Marriage Family Therapy magazine. And so this is how I describe it. I say, imagine if you have a couple that's been married, let's say 12 years, they
Mhm.
have a son that's 6 and a daughter that's 10, and the kids are doing what typical kids do. And mom and dad have a disagreement, which turns into a kind of let's just call it a light argument.
Yeah.
And there's some conflict and there's the things are heating up a little bit. But all of a sudden, Johnny comes in, who's 6, can't find his toy, and he's frustrated and he wants his toy. And mom and dad say, listen, mom and dad we're talking about something really important right now. We need to work through this. And they're genuinely trying to repair. And Johnny may not like that, but as a 6-year-old, fully cognitively functioning little boy, he can understand that. Maybe he can go play with another toy. Maybe he can go watch TV or play on an iPad or whatever. So
Mhm.
that's the what I call the typical scenario. I know it's not always that neat, but here's the example. Let's take the same dynamic circumstance, but let's say that little boy has autism, 6 years old, autistic, maybe moderate to severe on the spectrum. Same thing happens. Little argument begins to occur. Things get kind of heated up, but all of a sudden, in the attempt to repair the relationship and things happening and kind of try to undo things that may be said or feelings that are hurt, Johnny comes in again, can't find his toy. But in this case, that little boy does not understand. Hey, give us a few minutes. Mom and dad are working out our conflict. We're trying to repair this, and everything has to stop for that little boy. And again, to your listeners that have children with autism or some other disability,
Mhm.
particularly that's behavioral or cognitive, you get it because they do not understand, nor do they care about your conflict
Right.
or your marriage in that sense. And so everything has to stop. And this is the example of where I say this goes sideways in a lot of marriages. And I've had so many people say that's exactly how it happens.
Mhm.
One parent typically will be the one to say, listen, I'll go find the toy. You just wait here or help me find it, and we'll come back and finish this conversation. And one partner then says, you know what? This happens every time, and we never finish this conversation. Now, and I take that and say, overlay that happens a multitude of times
Mhm.
in a single day or a single week over months of time. And that has a cumulative effect for what I call the attachment cycle. When I know that's coming, the conflict is going to erupt. We're not going to repair it. And the distance, and
Mhm.
again, it doesn't happen overnight. Like any marriage,
Right.
there's a lot of things that happen in relationships that happen slowly over time that are detrimental. And I propose and purport to you that happens, but it's uniquely related to the dynamics. And let me say this again clearly, that's not the child's fault. That is a
Right.
dynamic created by diagnosis, if you will.
Right. Right. I think that is so important for people to hear because if you haven't been part of a family affected by disability or been a parent, a child with a disability, you may not ever think about that. So often when we think about conflict in marriage, we think about it in that little bubble of here's the conflict, here's the
Yep.
solution. And I think that this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but I think this is probably one of the major problems when parents of children with disabilities go to marriage counseling with most counselors who are not familiar with the disability dynamic, that then they are set up for a solution they can't ever get to. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you seen that to be true?
Oh, can I talk a little bit about that?
Okay, yes.
No, and I think that's really my passion in the clinical
Mhm.
world to educate therapists and counselors because I mean, I don't know how many couples I've talked with who've said, their frustration with a counselor therapist is the advice
Mhm.
that they get is, well, you guys just got to take some time and figure. That's stop right there. You don't have time and space to
Yeah,
create something that doesn't exist.
right.
And again, here's how that plays out. That theme plays itself out many times over a day or a 24-hour period. By the time you get to bedtime, those parents are absolutely exhausted. And the last thing they want to do is talk about their conflict.
Right.
Uh, they just want to fall into bed and be done with the day. And that's if their kid goes to bed. Uh, I'll give you case in point. Our little guy went to bed at 8 o'clock last night, but he didn't go to sleep until probably almost 10.
Yeah.
Thankfully, my wife and I weren't in conflict, but had we
Yeah.
been, it would have been totally hijacked by this reality that interrupts again that typical flow of attachment that we all crave. Attachment is something that we all want. I mean, it's what part of why we get married, right?
Right.
Is to be close to someone. And this disruption that happens for some couples, frankly, for us, it's very unpredictable. For some families, it may feel more constant. And so understanding that for a family with a disability, special needs, again, whatever we call it, the dynamics created in that home and family are so unique and different. And so, for example, and you might have hinted at this, but if not, I just want to touch on it. But time, just the time to go and, for example, just to go on a date. How hard is for your listeners? They're all going to be waving their fists in the air and say yes. How hard is it for you to have a date with your spouse? Because for a lot of families with a special needs child, or even a physical disability, finding someone who is dare I say qualified.
Right.
Sometimes it just takes somebody being a friend and being willing to step in the space to learn the nuances of what autism looks like or Down syndrome. But some kids are very resistant to having anybody but mom and dad. So just having the time to repair and invest in your relationship can be challenging as well. And I think I just went way off topic, but that was
no, that's okay.
Mostly relevant.
Yeah, it's really true. So if you are, let's start with if you're in a marriage like this where you are parenting a child with a disability or special needs, and you find yourself in these kind of patterns, what would you tell them, Brad? What?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's no quick solution, but what do they need to hear?
Well, what they wanted, somebody once asked me, what do you want people to know? And I've often said, what I wish I could really convey to people is how much we crave to just feel normal and to be typical like everyone else. And we can't. Because of those challenges, because of the uniqueness of, we can't just, we may not just be able to go out to a restaurant at will, even with our family. We went through a phase. I mean, Barb, we went almost 5 years without going out to eat at a restaurant as a family, because there was a time at which my wife said, we're not doing this again.
Right.
And I had to realize, like, this is not getting better. And we need to, and now COVID happened and all of that too, that impacted our everybody's ability to go out to eat. But it was well after that we eventually finally got to a place where we were able to kind of re-engage, for us, some sense of normal and going out. But what would people do in that scenario? And let me use this analogy. If you've ever buttoned your shirt and you've gotten the first button in the wrong hole, you don't realize that until you get, to the bottom of the top, depending on which way you go, right? And you're like, wait, my shirt's all messed up. I think the first conversation somewhere that needs to be had, and this is the work that I'm doing in frankly, in my research, and that is, how does a couple grieve what was lost about their relationship that they had before the child and before the disability and after the disability?
Yeah.
Because I think that loss of the freedom, I mean, children change your lives for, regardless. I remember in seminary, my wife and I, we could decide in 30 seconds to go out to eat, and that was a date night, right?
Right.
You can't do that after you have kids.
Right.
And you can't do that after, when you have a child with disability. That's a whole nother level. That changes the game of being able to relate to each other. But I think one of the first conversations to have is, what parts of us were lost, but also what parts can we reclaim, and what parts can be reinvigorated, that maybe, or should I say, rediscovered.
Yeah.
Because I think for some couples, there are strengths we didn't know we had. We didn't want them, but we have them because of the challenges that we face, and we're actually better for it.
Yeah. Can you expand on that, Brad? Because in all the conversations I've had about this with people, I haven't heard very many people talk about what you can gain.
Mm,
I think that's got to be so important in this reclaiming your peace and joy.
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, and
Yeah.
that maybe you remembered this, but I actually last month I spoke again at the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy
Yeah.
conference in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
My first workshop that I did, part one, was called "Grief in the Special Needs Marriage,"
Yeah.
and I talked about those things and the losses that we have. I mean, there are people that lose relationships because friends don't know how to
Right.
relate, or they say hurtful things, and so it's
Right.
very easy for special needs families to just isolate. So we really talked about the grief. That's easy. It's kind of morbid. But the
Mm-hmm.
second workshop that I did was called Finding Joy in the Grief of the Special Needs Marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some real ironies in the journey of having a special needs child. And one of them that I talked about, there's a couple that I met. Um, I won't use their names. I doubt they're listening, but out of respect for our
Yeah.
conversation, I had a conversation with them several months ago, and it really opened my eyes and my thought process to this intimacy
Mm-hmm.
in the grief of being a special needs parent. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you got to tell me more about that. Um, and it's interesting in this reaches back to the attachment that I was talking about. Think about, I would call it typical grief when families grieve the loss of a family member.
Mm-hmm.
There is a closeness in that.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, I realize funerals and loss of a family member can bring up a whole lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of families, there's a very, I'll put it in this way, very intimate moments in sharing that grief and that loss of that family.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, this couple shared with me how over time, not at first, I mean, in fact, they were very clear to say, early on, there
Yeah.
was no intimacy out of this grief, but over time,
Right.
in the sticking with it, if you will, the stick-to-itiveness, as I like to call it,
Yeah.
there came this intimacy by the fact that they had simply stayed together and toughed it out at times.
Yeah.
And and frankly, that doesn't probably sell well. That doesn't make a great book cover because it's
Yeah.
gritty and it's
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah.
But I look at this couple and I thought, these people understand what other levels of intimacy are in a way that I'm not sure that some people can even grasp and wrap their head around
Yeah.
because of all that they had been through. And by the way, let me add this caveat. Their son, who was an adult, and I forget what disability he had. I'm not sure if it was Down syndrome or not,
Uh-huh.
but he had died at, I believe, age 32 or 33.
Mm-hmm.
And that intimacy carried through that grief process of not only having lost from the beginning certain elements of their life and marriage that they had had
Mm-hmm.
before that,
Mm-hmm.
but it now carried into the loss of their son
Yeah.
as parents who outlived their child. Think about
Yeah.
that for a moment.
Yeah.
And that grief led them to different levels of intimacy that I have trouble wrapping my head around.
Yeah.
But that speaks to a little bit, and that's kind of messy, and I apologize, but
No,
I
it
don't have it
makes.
figured out. But I think you get the idea that there are some places in which intimacy and closeness exist,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes a whole lot of work to stay there in that space to
Mm-hmm.
find out what that means and what it looks like.
So let me ask you this, because this is what I'm hearing. So tell me if I'm hearing it right. Okay. Um, the intimacy comes because when you both get to the level of acceptance, is that
Mm,
part of it? Then you understand each other in a way that other people don't. And having that other person that gets everything the way you do, you can't replicate that with anyone else. And that is
mm.
special and that is deep.
That is
In
beautifully said.
in the meantime,
Mm,
you don't get to that level of acceptance at the same time. And I would imagine that's where the marriage is really risky for a lot of couples because one person is ahead of the other. And
absolutely.
so I would imagine if you're that person that's ahead, you have to have a lot of prayer and patience and
Yep,
grace until the other person
absolutely.
gets there. Is that right?
That's so spot on, Barb. I think with many things in life,
Mm-hmm.
even outside of the special needs disability journey,
Mm-hmm.
we're not always in sync on the same wavelength of where we're at in acceptance, even in grief.
Yeah.
Uh, with families that grieve the loss of, for example, like a child. I mean,
Right.
accepting that, finding your way through that. I mean, the divorce rate among parents who lose a child is incredibly high, and
Yeah.
I'm speculating and hypothesizing this live, if you will, but
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that plays into the fact that those parents are in so different places in that grieving process that
Mm-hmm.
they absolutely lose their sense of connection to each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the blame and guilt that they have that come naturally in the loss of a child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and that's the difference in this journey is that one of the awkward things about the conversation of grief, particularly, is how do you grieve something? Because most people think of grief with something as a response to loss of life. Well,
Right.
that's true, but it's much broader than that in
Right.
its application. People grieve the loss of a job.
Right.
They grieve the loss of when they move and they lose community or
Yeah.
church or whatever it
Right.
is. And so, again, it goes back to your original question, recognizing the parts of our relationship that we just frankly we're not going to have the same autonomy that we had. There are
Mm-hmm.
parts of our ability to do things. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the Welcome to Holland poem that I'm
Yeah.
sure many of your listeners are familiar with.
Right.
You don't end up going where you thought you were going.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be some work over, what we lost our money to go to Italy. We're in Holland instead, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and so, but there's some beautiful things about not only where we're going, but
Yeah.
sometimes even the journey in getting there.
Yeah, I think
So,
so. And I want to just expanding on that. You had mentioned another time, I don't think we have this on the podcast, but you had said one time that Kaydan, your son who has Down syndrome and autism, was the gift you guys never asked for. But in that, you said that he has brought many gifts to your life. What kind of gifts have you gotten from being his parent?
wow. Okay, maybe need to grab the tissues for this one, but I've often reflected that, and in my book, if I can tout that, which hopefully
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
out in the
yeah.
late winter, early spring of 2025. Um, I've often said that, and again, this isn't assigning. It's not a matter of blame. That's not the right way to say it. But what the diagnosis has brought out of me are the best parts of me and the
Yeah,
worst parts of me.
yeah.
And both of those things together, through the redeeming power of Christ, have made me a better person. It's made me a better father. I
Mhm.
think in some ways, I'm more patient.
Yeah,
In other ways, I've realized how impatient I really am.
yeah.
And there's a whole lot of I think there's a whole lot of paradox that I've embraced in my life. And I think before Kaydan, I'll say it this way. Um, and I think who doesn't want their life to be very neatly organized and structured? And, from a Christian's perspective, we want to be Christ-like, and we don't want there to be any bad stuff in our lives. And we just want to live peacefully with everybody and be filled with the Spirit. And then you have things happen, and it's not even, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
special needs
Right.
diagnosis. And all of a sudden, all that kind of goes out the window, and you realize you're left with this messiness of life,
Yeah.
and realize that, like, wait a minute, how does this get sanctified? um, and I'll give you a very kind of crass example that I write about. I call this chapter "Swimming in Our Own Stuff."
Mhm.
And to be very open, and you get listeners that'll get this. And Kayden will go to the bathroom in the bathtub,
Uh-huh.
and it's messy, it's gross. And I remember one time, in my own anger of, like, child, why do you not get about this? Is disgusting.
Right.
And I remember having that thought of, you're swimming in your own stuff. And probably in my head, I didn't say it quite that neatly.
Yeah.
But there was a moment even in that moment, that I realized it. It was kind of like God said to me, you do the same thing.
Yeah.
And we all kind of do. We all
Yeah.
swim in our own stuff. And just as a father who is charged and called to clean up this mess that my own son created, I
Mhm.
was reminded that we have a heavenly Father that does the same thing for us.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes those moments, those lessons, um, they remind me,
Mhm.
and it keeps in front of me, that Christ shows His love for us not in our perfection,
Yeah.
not on our best day, but really on our worst.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful.
So
And I agree with that. As I think when you talk about as Christians, we want to have the neat and tidy life with no conflict. And I always think like, that sounds really boring, Brad. I mean, come on. Like, when was the last blockbuster movie you went to? Was like everything worked out. Come see.
yeah,
Like,
right.
I think that you get your depth. I can only speak for me personally, but the hard things that I've been through, and in particular in parenting, we have a son who has a tic disorder, and when he was young, he got a head injury. He got hit in the head with a baseball bat at baseball practice.
Eesh.
Yeah, and
Wow.
that made the tic disorder go bananas,
Oh my
like,
goodness.
so much worse. And I remember in the worst moments of that, that is when I went the deepest in my faith,
Hmm.
and it was like a before and after for me with connecting to Christ, because probably
Hmm.
similar in similar ways to you and a lot of people have been through some really hard things. If you're going to keep leaning in, then you're going to keep leaning in forever. And I think like, what would my life
Hmm.
look like now? What would my inner life look like now if things were always neat and tidy and there weren't that conflict? Who would we really be, and would we really want to be those people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of to use. It's I guess it's kind of a an object lesson of sorts, or
Mm.
it's not necessarily Christian, but the story of the skin horse, uh, in being the Velveteen Rabbit. That was it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the skin horse, and
Like,
I
what's
feel
the
some.
skin horse? I've
Yeah,
never heard this.
you don't
No.
remember this story, and
No.
and I'm messing. There'll be some listeners would get this,
Okay.
but the whole story is about being real.
Okay.
And in the story, if I remember it correctly, the skin horse is this nice toy, right? That's neat. Well, over time, he gets used and played with, which is what
Mhm.
makes him real.
Yeah.
And all of his hair gets rubbed off, and the wood's
Ah.
chipped, and there's
Yeah.
splinters, and I'm probably driving somebody crazy. It's like, no, that's not exactly how it goes. But the whole point is, the
Mm.
skin horse becomes real through, frankly, being played with really rough,
Mhm. Mhm.
but he's real and he's
Mhm.
loved.
Yeah.
And so, and I kind of liken sometimes the experience as a special needs parent.
Mhm.
Uh, you get beat up a little bit,
Mhm.
sometimes a lot.
Yeah,
Uh, but I feel that I'm just more authentic because of that. Um,
for sure.
I'm not sure how other people view that. Maybe I'm just crass or something else. But I definitely feel that this journey has made me more attuned. It's certainly made me more attuned with human suffering.
Yeah,
Because I think we all, whether we want to or not, whether we say we do or don't, I think internally we do at least. We always compare ourselves.
sure.
That's a
Yeah.
natural inclination, and it's very easy for me to, uh, and I work really hard sometimes. Man, this is way off script, but I
There's
think
no script. It's just this free
what I
flow.
no, but what I work really hard to do is realize that, yeah, I've been given a gift that I didn't ask for, that allows me to relate to people where they're
Mhm.
at.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Yes. I think that's definitely true. Um, and I think the more people who could do that, that could relate to people where they are in a genuine way, and a little bit less of this, we're all trying to be perfect, would
Yeah,
make the world a better place, frankly.
hmm,
That is
for
good.
sure, for sure.
Yeah. So, with your passion about the marriage, you have started the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, back to that, man. You took me on a journey there.
I'm sorry. I go
Don't be
deep.
sorry. So no, what's really cool about what I'm doing now, and I think as I shared in the last
Yeah,
podcast, I actually retired from the Army in June
right?
of this year after 25
Mhm.
years. And as such, through all of that journey, especially with Kaydan and in my academic pursuit, I've left the Army to become the director of the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute, which is
Yeah.
kind of in a nutshell.
Mhm.
It's a partnership with Grace Church of Nazarene here in Nashville.
Yeah.
We have started two or we've started a special needs ministry there. What I was referencing to, we now have two grants that we've been working from with the state of Tennessee to begin special needs ministry, as well as making our we have a family restroom with a complete adult size changing table. If you know what that is, you know that's a big deal because those aren't cheap. And
Right.
it takes a lot of space to install one of those. And we literally just did that a week and a half ago and dedicated it for use for families that need that and individuals, frankly.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
so that's the first partnership of
Mhm.
ministry. That's the ministry arm of the SNMFI, as I call it. The
Mhm.
second arm is really what I would call it burgeoning right now and evolving and becoming what it is, and that's the clinical academic arm. And for one, what my goal is in partnership with the church, we have a space, a modular building that we are in the process right now of transforming into what I would call a therapeutic slash clinical space.
Mhm.
And I specifically want to work uniquely and solely with families who have special needs children.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned about what do we want people to know.
Yeah.
The other dynamic of families who need services and support and who want them, their biggest issue is who's going to watch my kid while my husband and I or my wife and I go sit with the therapist. And
Right.
so one of the goals as I'm working through all of this, all of these details, is not only creating a place for those families, but creating a dynamic in which when they come for that kind of help and support, that
Mhm.
there is a professional staff to actually watch and care for their child while they're in session. And they don't have to worry about it.
Wow. That's
That
great.
that's a big that's a lot to bite off and chew.
Yeah.
Um, the other partnership in that is right now a burgeoning conversation with Trevecca Nazarene University, because in my doctoral work, what the clinical world is recognizing is, hey, we need more training on this. So I'm
Right.
having a conversation with Trevecca about the
Mhm.
possibility of we're just asking questions right now, but there's an open dialogue and there's recognition that, hey, maybe we need to consider expanding our counseling program
Right.
to maybe include a class on counseling
Yeah.
special needs marriages, individuals with disabilities. So those are the kind of conversations that's a work in progress, but that's what I call the academic effort of the
Yeah.
SNMFI, and that has a lot of potential. And I just dare say prophetically, as God continues to open doors,
Right.
that's gonna happen
Right.
somewhere, and hopefully more than one place.
Right. So just to recap, so you guys are working on the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute. It's not open yet, but it's in process.
It is.
And the goal, part of the goal there is to have counselors who specialize in families affected by disability and also have a place where the child can be watched so the parents can actually be in the session. Is that correct?
That's a pretty good summary. What I would say that the caveat to that is what the SNMFI will become in partnership with Trevecca, or at least
Mhm.
what we're projecting right now,
Mhm.
is that will be a place where I can have interns.
Mhm.
So it becomes really a learning center of
Mhm.
working with those families, which I think in the long term would merit somebody eventually saying, you know what, I love work. That's how people find their niche when they
Yeah.
start working with a specific community, and then they realize they're loving working with this
Mm.
specific population. They're good at it,
Mhm.
and then our capabilities expand by not just it being me, but it being
Mhm.
one or two other people on staff, if you will, of a legitimate counseling center. So
Yeah.
that
Well,
institute is right now really an idea, but
yeah.
there is a building. I can point you to the building right
Yeah.
now. This is going to be the home of the SNMFI, and as we get later this month, we'll be doing some remodeling of that space,
Mhm.
and we're actually hoping, not hoping, we're planning on really the launch of that space as a functional entity standing on its own merit to be in April, which will be commensurate with the launch of the special needs respite ministry of Grace Nazarene Church. So it's kind of a
Wow. Yeah.
parallel process right now. So yeah, a
That's
lot of
awesome.
moving parts to that.
Yeah. Well, what I love about it is once you get this up and going, it can serve as a model for other places to do something similar. Because I've never even heard of like a counseling center that would also offer watching the child.
Absolutely.
And that's such a
I hope
huge
so.
obstacle. That's such a huge obstacle when you're talking about families affected by disability trying to get marriage counseling.
Yeah.
First, you have the obstacle that most counselors are not familiar with the dynamics and so
Mhm.
aren't prepared to talk to you. And then you don't have anyone to watch your child. So to have two of those obstacles removed
Yeah.
is gives so much hope for couples. That is just
Yeah.
exciting.
And I know that there is a need in the community. I've
Yeah.
I've heard that voiced in the
Hmm.
circles. Not long, we hadn't lived here a week, and I
Hmm.
was privy to email traffic that was asking that question: are there any therapists in the local area that work with families who have special needs children?
Right.
And so, yeah, there is a need out there. There's people recognizing that this is a unique and very frankly underserved population, to use that kind of terminology. So,
For sure. Let me ask you this. In the meantime, if you are a pastor who's listening to this podcast and you
mm,
have couples in your church who have children with disabilities and they come to you for pastoral marriage counseling,
mm.
what should they do or not do?
Wow. Ooh, that's a good question. What should they do or not do? Well,
Yeah.
the first thing I would say this not to do is to tell them that you can't help them. That will those people will leave your church, and I'm just going to dare say this: good for them, because Jesus spent 70% of his miracles were with people with disability.
Hmm.
And so, if you think about where Scripture calls us, really, to be sensitive to those with disability, with special needs. We literally have a scriptural mandate. I could talk a lot about that. I'm not going to. But what I would say to do is to ask them, how can I help? Maybe
Hmm.
you're not trained, you don't feel qualified. And I say this: people say to me, "Oh, this is great. You're doing this ministry and stuff, and how long you been doing this?" I'm like, "I haven't." I call it the walk on water ministry principle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Peter had no experience when Jesus said to him,
Right.
"Get out of the boat."
Yeah. I
And
hear
I am
you.
literally walking on water right now in this sense that I've never done this before.
Yeah.
And so when you have couples come to you or a family that says, "Hey, we're really struggling. We don't know what to do. We don't know who to turn to," um, any of us can listen. We have two ears and one mouth, and that's by God's design, I think,
Mhm.
in the symbolism of what that can mean to somebody that's hurting.
Mhm.
But I think one of the most powerful things that we can do, one of the simplest things that I do as a trained therapist is simply this: tell me your story.
Mhm.
Tell me your story. What's life like for you? Tell me about your child's diagnosis and
Mhm.
how's that impacted you. What's made your family better in that way? What's been your biggest challenge? There's some very simple questions that you can ask that, frankly, will mean the world to those families,
Mhm.
because most people that don't understand disability, they tend to fear it, and so therefore
Right.
they don't say anything, and they
Right.
avoid, and that's what becomes very isolating, and that's
Yeah.
why 10% or less in families with special needs children attend church.
Right.
And if we can create a culture that, we're not afraid to engage those families, we're not
Mhm.
afraid to stumble into the conversation of, is it okay if I talk to your child? How do you want me
Mhm.
to talk to your child?
Mhm.
Oh, well, we don't use special needs, we use disability. Oh, thank you for telling me that. Whatever it
Right.
is, don't be
Right.
afraid to enter that space.
Yeah.
It's so endearing to me when people will come up to me and they'll say, is it okay if I talk to him? And I'm like, please do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kaydan will talk to you. He is quite
Yeah.
entertaining
Yeah.
if you get him in his element. And so, but just being as authentic and genuine as you can, recognizing limitations, but also recognizing that, what, they're just people and they just want to be
Mhm.
cared for and loved. And
Mhm.
as pastors, especially, and I know this is a listening audience, but I'm pointing as I say this,
Yeah.
we owe it to them to extend grace and a hand of fellowship and the love of Christ.
Mhm. Absolutely. That was a really good answer,
So
Brad.
that was almost preachy,
But it
but
was good. It's really true. I mean, giving people an outlet to speak and be heard without feeling judged
yeah,
or being told what they should or shouldn't do, I think that's huge. That was really good.
absolutely. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your journey as a special needs parent has impacted your own faith?
Yeah, I think it goes back to being more authentic and really, I look for God to show up in moments that I don't think before I would have looked for Him,
Mm-hmm.
and in places and spaces that um, really are more the still small voice than they are the earthquake shaking or the fire.
Mm-hmm.
There are just small moments in which, uh, and be in fairness and all authenticity, my radar is not always on. Sometimes I miss it. I lose my cool with Kaydan. I lose my cool with my wife, and but yet, what's so endearing about that? We look at those. I think this is where I've matured in my own faith. I don't see those as failures as much as I see those moments as opportunities uh, for grace to be infused in those failures, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but those moments create for me opportunities to experience God's grace in a renewed way,
Mm-hmm.
almost on a daily basis, that I need uh,
Mm-hmm.
to remind me that I'm still human and that I'm still loved.
Yeah.
And God shows me, and there are also other wonderful moments in which I think God's love is expressed to me through Kaydan in ways that I was having a conversation with somebody in our church. I wish I could remember who it was, but we were talking about. So Kaydan he's very verbal.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have listeners whose children are not verbal and wish that they
Mm-hmm.
were. Uh, Kaydan is verbal, but my wish is to understand him.
Right.
There are a lot of words that he says that I can make out, and there's sometimes words it's like, man, if you only had subtitles, this would make life a lot easier. Um,
Right.
but somebody said to me, and I actually wrote about it. This is where this conversation
Mm-hmm.
went. I said I wrote about this in my book that maybe is it that people, individuals with disabilities who are nonverbal, who don't talk as clearly as the rest of us,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they have some understanding of God's grace that we have no access to through that disability. And so sometimes I wonder in Kaydan's very tender moments, which I could give you some wonderful examples of, and I'm sure some of your listeners with their kids just have beautiful examples as well. But there are just some moments when it's just like, you were just an absolute conduit of grace. 20
Mm-hmm.
minutes from now, you can be the conduit of great frustration and angst in our house. But
Mm-hmm.
right now, you are a conduit of grace. And again, I
Yeah.
think it goes back to us swimming in our own stuff. The same is true for us.
Mm-hmm.
We can be the conduits of great hurt and pain for other people by the things we say and things we do or don't do. But we can
Mm-hmm.
also be conduits of great grace into the lives of other people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, Kaydan, there are just moments in which he has a gift of empathy that
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there are moments he has a way to know when I'm not doing well.
Mm.
And he'll put his arm around me, and I can hear him. For me, I understand what he said and say, "Dad, you okay?"
Oh.
And I'll just kind of, it's like, and there's no snowballing him. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, buddy, daddy's not okay right now. Daddy's sad.
Yeah.
Uh, and those are just incredible moments that God reminds me through that little boy that he loves me and he's checking up on me as well.
Yeah.
So I don't even remember what the question was.
Well,
I
that's
ended up,
okay. Now
uh,
I'm thinking about that's okay. I think, gosh, just that image of having someone there with their arm around you, just
yeah,
asking, "Are you okay?" when you're not, and then just I imagine he's just is gonna stay with you there for a minute.
he does.
Yeah,
He
that's
does, and he
that's
hugs me. Oh, it's so endearing. I wish I had a picture of that, and I hope I've painted somewhat of a picture your listeners can
mhm,
kind of envision. But it's just, and I'm sure other people have those, and you know, when those moments happen, that I think those are moments in which God is reminding us through our children, like, I'm here for you, and
yeah,
I'm using this thing, this diagnosis, and your child, who by the way is still a human being made in my image,
right.
to remind you that I love you through them.
Boy, I mean, you talk about being made in God's image, I that is the picture I think of, that picture of empathy. That I'm here for you. You don't have to be okay or perfect. I love you. And
Yeah,
just that pure love. I mean, talk about a gift. My
it
goodness.
it is. You said a word, the purity of that love in those moments is just, there's no angle that's being worked. There's no agenda. It's just, I'm just here with you and I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Very
I love
powerful.
it. Well, I love this conversation because I just feel like it is just peppered with so much hope. Because I think we hear so much about, it is difficult
Yeah.
to be in a family affected by disability. There's no two ways about it. It's hard.
Right.
And it is hard on the marriage, it's hard on the family, but there's also this whole other side that you've been talking about today that is beautiful
Yeah.
and exciting. And the work you're doing with the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute, man alive, that is super exciting. So can you tell us a little bit more about when you think that you said it's going to be launched probably in April?
Yeah. The building itself should be done by April.
Mm-hmm.
And our first respite care event is going to be April, I believe, the 12th.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking at, or April 5th or 12th. But that's the window of time in which our goal is to have the institute, if you will, fully functional,
Mm-hmm.
and open for business, if you will. And then
Mm-hmm.
once we have that space, then the other conversation continues at Trevecca to say, hey, we've got space now. We're open for business. When can we talk about an intern the next fall, the next semester, in which interns
Mm-hmm.
become available for placement in a clinical setting? So that's going to have a whole lot of impact and influence. And again, with the research that I'm doing in that community, not to go too far in the weeds with you on this, but my observation as I continue to do research is that there's a lot of studies. I'll try not to make this too technical. A lot of studies will say, yes, having a special needs child has a significant impact on the relationship or a detriment, or marital satisfaction is lower in these families than it is compared to typical families. But I read those things and I go, yes, but the question I'm asking is, in what way? How
Mm-hmm.
exactly do you define that difficulty or that challenge? And so that's in my research, what I'm trying to get after is designing a study, if you will, that says, tell me about that specific struggle. What makes it difficult? What makes it challenging? And how does it impact you? I gave my
Mm-hmm.
example of the 6 and the 10-year-old. But what does it look like for real couples in real time?
Right.
And more than just, yep, it's hard.
Yeah. Yes.
And so out of that, from a researcher standpoint, what I really hope to do, and I'm already working on, if that's no big surprise, probably, but really developing what I would say are a clinical model and interventions to
Mm-hmm.
help those families specifically with those specific challenges unique to being and falling in that definition of what I call a special needs marriage.
I think it's so exciting, Brad. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, this is so needed. So if anyone's listening, they want to learn more, like maybe their church wants to kind of look at some of the things you guys are talking about, even the respite part, or counselors out there that want to learn more about these strategies. Is there
absolutely.
any place they can go for information?
Yes, walkingwithkaydan.com is my website.
Okay.
Thank you for throwing me that softball there to throw that out. www.walkingwithkaydan.com. I've done a lot of work to try to keep that up to date
Uh-huh.
and have put some recent updates on things evolving and happening in that
Uh-huh.
space. And I also have some resources, which Wonderful Works is
Uh-huh.
one of those resources on my page as well.
Uh-huh.
And I have some others that would be very familiar to some of your listeners as well, for churches that are looking at or considering
Mhm.
special needs ministry.
Mhm.
None of us is as smart as all of us. I
That's
will say
right.
that in this
That's
space. And
right.
so we all need each other
Right.
in the journey, and equipping. Kind of my mantra is equipping, enabling, and empowering both individuals, families, and churches in that
Mhm.
space, as well as professional caregivers.
Yep.
There's a little bit of everything, a little bit of all of that for people on my
Mhm.
website. A couple of
Mhm.
the articles that I've written defining the special needs marriage, you can find that there as
Mhm.
well. A couple of sermons that I've preached in this space about disability ministry. So
Mhm.
it's a resource for you. Walkingwithkaydan.com.
Yeah. And tell us about your book. When is it coming out, and what is it about, and why'd you write it?
My last conversation with my publisher, Shiny Light, was that I'm next in the queue for editing.
Okay.
And so long as things have gone well, I think probably somewhere in the February, March timeframe.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I started the book really a long time ago. I remember announcing to the family, "I'm gonna write a book," and everybody, "Yay!" And it's like, "Dad, it's been 6 years ago. When's the book gonna come out?" Which is
Yeah.
not an uncommon experience for other authors that I've gotten
Yeah.
to meet and know how long it takes, especially for the first book. But I call it Walking with Kaydan, a journey of faith, struggle, and hope. And it's really, I think my agent, we kind of dubbed it inspirational Christian living is kind of the term we gave it, because it's a little more autobiographical in that sense. But it's more than that, because it's really a lot of the God moments, a couple that I've shared here in a nutshell, but really more in an expanded fashion. But the really fun hook of the book is that Kaydan was born in the car on the way to the hospital. And
Right.
so the beginning of the book is, I think the first chapter is called A Wild Ride.
Yeah.
And you have to get the book, because I'll just leave that there. But his
Yeah. Yeah.
birth story, being born in the car, it was our fifth child. My wife has very quick labors. And for you moms out there, from the time my wife's water broke to Kaydan coming into this world was 12 minutes.
That is insane.
And we did not make it to the hospital.
Crazy, man.
So that's how Kaydan's entrance was as dramatic as he is
Wow.
in person. So,
Wow.
so yeah, thanks for asking about that. That's out.
Yeah.
That's coming as well. So
Great. Well, we are excited for the book. We'll keep our listeners updated when it comes out, and excited for
yeah,
the
thank you.
Institute. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our listeners today, Brad?
No, I just, Barb, I just appreciate you and Leah, the work that you guys do at Wonderful Works, and the work that we're getting to do collaboratively with the church. There just seems to me to be this kind of wave of awareness that's kind of building momentum in a lot of circles in the church, in the clinical world that I see, in the world of academia. There's just a lot more awareness these days that I think is long overdue and still much needed. And just appreciate the work you're doing to bring some of that awareness, and just so honored and thankful to be a part of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here today, and we appreciate all the work that you're doing. It's an exciting future for the mission, for sure. So thank you, Brad, for being here today.
Thank you. God bless, and Merry Christmas.
You too. To learn more about Chaplain Brad Lee and the Special Needs Marriage and Family Institute, please visit walkingwithkaydan.com. Kaydan is spelled Kaydan. And to see what we've been working on lately, check us out at wonderfulworksministry.org. And don't forget, if you like this podcast, please follow and share with others. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.